Good evening, everyone. We'll start with the brief introductions. I'm Josh VanDeraa. We're here to talk a little bit about Netbox and Ansible. So who am I? I'm a 16-year network vet. Many here already have worked with me at some point in time, but if you not or you haven't, I look forward to at some point in time. I'm a network automation engineer with Network to Code. You may hear me affectionately call that NTC over time. So if I'll try to keep not saying abbreviation of NTC, but if you do hear that, let's just go ahead and associate NTC with Network to Code at that point. For me, from an automation perspective, I've been working on automating networks with Python, and I moved to Ansible with the 2.0 release. Although that's not the only tools we're using these days in network automation. Really, from a CI perspective, Jenkins, Travis, various other tools, Terraform, you name it, we're looking at trying to embrace it from a network automation perspective. And why am I here to talk about NetBox? Well, I've built quite a few network automation frameworks with NetBox as that source of truth. And so I absolutely love working with it. And I want to just share that with the community. So you can find me on Twitter. My handle down there is VanDeraa, and then LinkedIn as well. As you'll kind of see me a little more active in those two locations these days. So who is Network to Code? Network to Code is a network automation solution provider. We look to bridge the gap between software development, DevOps, and network engineering teams. So a little bit briefly about us there too is you can find our main webpage link here, but we also have a blog that is relatively active at blog.networktocode.com. We're posting about weekly at this point and lots of different articles on different topics. You can subscribe, and I encourage you to take a look. So then the agenda, we already took care of the introduction a little bit. I'm going to talk about source of truth because that's a very important piece to why am I here to talk about NetBox. And then look at NetBox as a source of truth and how that leads and plays into Ansible. With that, we'll cover the Netbox Inventory plugin and the new Netbox Collections. Again, if you haven't heard about that, came out in Ansible 2.9, and it's the drive to really start to take stuff out of the main Ansible inventory and move it into separate tooling. So, and then the second half, we'll take a look at filtering specifically and how we use filters to audit our source of truth. So what's the source of truth? Is it in our head? Nope, that's definitely not going to work if we're trying to be collaborative. We've all seen lots of stuff in notepads. That's also not what we consider a source of truth. Maybe an Excel sheet that's coming in, but I'm here really to talk about not using these tools that are legacy on a system, looking at source of truth. Now, when I say source of truth, I'm not saying that there has to be one system that has the source of every piece of information about your business or about your network or about your servers. It's really that there needs to be a single source of authority about each piece of data. So in a perfect world, when we're taking a look at sources of truth from a data domain, how do we know what devices are in the network? I've been part of a few audits where, hey, let's make sure we know how many devices we have. Let's check the monitoring tool. Let's check this. Well, let's also take a look at having NetBox as that system of record to tell us what all of our devices are. IP addresses. Here, NetBox we'll take a look at all the features of NetBox, but NetBox can play in this space. But if you already have an IPAM, you're already using it, loving it, let's not go ahead and come in with a tool and say we have to change this. That can be your authoritative point for IP addresses, no, not a problem. And then I've also seen we've got the capability to start tracking about tenant information or clients, but most likely that information is going to be best suited in a CRM tool, or if you have some addresses that you need to know about, that's not going to be part of the IT tooling, but that's going to be, hopefully there's a tool that has a friendly API that you can use to leverage to get that information. And perhaps there's a synchronization that happens between that tool, let's say ServiceNow, and NetBox. So that sync happens daily or every 4 hours or something, and it using APIs just keeps everything in sync. So then what is NetBox? It's really there to help define the intended state of your network. It's free and open source software, so that's one of the beautiful parts, and why I got involved in working on it is it didn't cost anything to get started. And one of my favorite things about it is it's got a very robust API. You're able to create devices, delete devices, read about device information, and it's all in a very simple API, in my opinion. So under the hood, it's a Django Python application. It uses Nginx or Apache to serve up the HTTP front end and connect to the application underneath. And under the hood in the database, it's a PostgreSQL 9.4 or greater. So that's taken straight from the NetBox docs. We'll take a look at that link in a short bit. So just a couple other things. There's some questions that have happened. I just wanted to cover from what is NetBox and what it's not. We're going to track devices. So what kind of devices are they? So do you have an ASA 5525, an ASA 5515? What are the model numbers? And then where are they installed? Are they at data center 1, data center 2, or are they at a remote site somewhere? One of the great features as well with NetBox is it can model equipment racks. So I've seen a lot of, okay, let's get a Visio out and here's our rack with all the pieces. Now with that in NetBox where we have a device and then we also tell it what equipment rack it's in, we can get that visual just right there in a tool. It's able to model connections, so network console power connections. And then data circuits. So what we're here talking about networking side of things, it would be very appropriate that make sure that we have the data circuits. So we know what size of the circuit is or who the provider is for it. And then mentioned the network team all loves IP address management, typically, or has to do with IP addresses. We're going to take a look at IP networks, addresses, and it can also track VRFs and VLANs. So been in plenty of places where VLANs are just the source of truth is the device itself, or you just know that VLAN exists out of the site, tribal knowledge. This helps to document that. And then lastly, as we look at a data center as a whole, we're talking about virtualization. So we got VMs and clusters. So we'll tie VMs to clusters and hosts to clusters and keep the virtualization piece there. There's been a few times where NetBox has come up and say, hey, can NetBox do this? Well, these are the things that for sure that have come up often and NetBox will not be doing. So first off, it's not a network monitoring tool. NetBox itself does not actually reach out to do anything. You need to put everything into NetBox yourself. Now you can write an API or write some other tooling to help you to put the information into NetBox in mass. But from a discovery perspective, it's not going to try to discover anything in your environment. It's not a DNS server, so it's not going to be available to go ahead and be queried, say, hey, what's google.com? It won't be able to tell you that. And then it's not a radius server, not config management, and not facilities management. They are all within the kind of similar space that NetBox may be in, but all those require NetBox reaching out, and by its design and intention, it's not actually doing anything to reach out. So a couple more additional features that we won't be demonstrating that I think are very powerful. These are a little more Pythonic or using Python, but custom scripts is a feature where you're able to, we have a picture over on the right here of the script data where we can say, build a web form and go ahead and build something. So if you're in having remote sites, this is a picture of adding additional site, and then it will build all the information into NetBox. Now there is some Python under the hood and make sure that you build all the connections, but it's there available to extend the capabilities of the tool. Webhooks themselves so on the bottom there we see NetBox can actually fire off individual webhooks. So if someone updates a device, updates the primary IP address of a device, or says, hey, we're going to delete this device, you can send that off to Slack or to some other webhook receiver and take action based on that. And a really exciting feature coming out that may start to extend NetBox even further is this fresh off the books here, or fresh off the presses from this past Monday on the 13th. 2.8 released a beta version of plugins. So you're going to be able to write your own Django and be able to get to that information straight from the NetBox interface. So what about the community? Since we're talking about free open source software, and if you're trying to find it, go to your favorite search browser or search engine and search for netbox-community. That should take you to the main GitHub page, which you can see a little bit on the right there. If you need assistance at some point, there's a Google user group for that. And then one of the beautiful things that we have, or that really got me into things with NetBox, is the Network to Code Slack channel. So you can go to slack.networktocode.com. There's, I think, 13,600 people on that particular Slack, and that's where the maintainers are doing all their work within NetBox, but it's also beyond just NetBox. It's really a community around network automation. So there's Ansible channels, there are Python channels, and a really good group of people that are there to help and drive network automation. So I encourage you to take a look there. All right, so we've done a lot of slide talk right now, but let's get into some of the interesting stuff. We'll take a look at NetBox at the GUI and then start to populate NetBox, and we'll be using the Ansible collections for that. And so these collections were built and are available are like modules, but they're outside of the main Ansible core. And so we'll take a little bit more about, when we get to the collections, talk about that and why is Ansible moving over to collections if you haven't seen that already. And then within this particular demo, we'll take a look at the NetBox Inventory plugin, where we're really going to show two playbooks here. Playbook 01, or the first one we'll take a look at, is we're going to go ahead and take NetBox from having no devices, and then we're going to add devices to NetBox with a temporary IP address, and that's all going to be from a static inventory that we all know and love when we first get started with Ansible. But then the second playbook, we're going to go ahead and add all the interface information using dynamic inventory. So we'll take a look and call that out specifically when we're in the demo. So first, this is a NetBox instance. It's running on Ubuntu 18 VM in my local network here. So when we get here, our navigation is across the top, where we're talking about our organization, where we're talking about physical pieces of things, such as a building or a region. So you can start to put things into various regions. If you're throughout the United States, you want to know what's in the Midwest versus East Coast or time zones, you can do some sorting in that methodology. Under devices, I'll just kind of highlight the things that we're going to go ahead and have filled in here. But whenever I'm doing this manually, I'm looking at starting at manufacturers. So I'm putting in Arista, Cisco, Juniper, etc. there. And then we're working our way up from device types. So device types are going to be your actual devices. So those are going to be your SRX firewall or your Arista switch in the exact model. Platforms. So within NetBox, to help network automation, so in the Cisco world, we've got iOS and iOS XE. Automations will do different things based on the platform type. And so by tracking the platforms, whether it's iOS, iOS XE, or Nexus, or EOS, or whatever the device type is, platforms helps to drive that. And then we got our device roles. So if it's out there. I haven't used this a ton, but if you're talking about, hey, my role is a firewall, my role is a router, or a switch based on the model number, instead of just based on the model number, you can start to track things on device roles. And then last are all those devices. And then IPAMs, we've got our prefixes, which are also a lot of people may think are subnets. So that's where we'll have some information there. And then IP addresses is self-explanatory. And then VLANs, we have VLANs and VLAN groups. So we'll kind of try to speed up and take a look at a few of these pieces as well. But we've got our virtual machines that we can track. And I think I don't have any builds yet. I'll show that in a short bit. And then we've got our circuits where we can start to track providers. I'm down in Apple Valley where we have Charter Spectrum. And so I've gone ahead and created a circuit, and we've got a circuit ID with a little more information so you can kind of keep on clicking through things. So want to take a look if you need, once you get it, you can get to the API docs by down on the bottom here. This comes installed, and then it's a fully documented Swagger REST API. So when you're building your automation and using the REST APIs, you can come in here and take a look. So let's get this started with our first playbook. So within the first playbook, I'll show the inventory quick. I've got some routers. So this is in my virtual environment here in my home. I've got some switches, and I've got some Nexus devices and some virtual EOS. And so when we look at NetBox, right now we don't have any devices. So as we go through, we'll take you on the full journey from being able to go from nothing in your NetBox all the way through. So we're going to have our starter inventory, and then we do have because they have secrets, I have to call for the file. And now this is using all Ansible collections that are available on the NetBox community GitHub organization. And what collections are is they're the start of modules, but instead of having the modules be a part of Ansible core where you have to wait for a new release every X amount of time, whether it's monthly for an update or a patch, it really starts, the reason why they're moving away with the popularity of Ansible is to be able to give those individuals that have modules or those organizations that have modules the ability to do their own life cycle. So Cisco is going to have all their stuff pulled out of Ansible core and moved into collections, at which point then you do need to install the collections from Ansible Galaxy at some point in the future. Now, there is still going to be a transition period, so when the new Ansible 2.10 comes out, it's not going to be like everything's broken, you need to wait and do things differently. There is going to be a transition period. So so we'll go ahead and take a look now. So on the NetBox side, we now have some devices. So when you go to this page, you're coming in, you've got your device name, you've got what site and what rack it's in. I did only rack a couple of these, and let's take a look at what that rack looks like. So you get a full-length diagram now, and this is running Ansible 2.7, so this isn't the latest 2.8 quite yet, and you can also go to save SVG. So now this previous page was a rendering from HTML, and that you'd basically, in order to get this information, would need to do a screenshot before. Now with SVG, you can actually get a good scalable image. I think that was a new feature in 2.7. And when we take a look then at our router, it's going to give us information, what site it's at. The site is a required field. So if you only have one site, you will need to create that one site. It will give you a device type, and one of the nice things about this, you can go to this device type and see how many instances you have. So as you're putting in, if you're in the Cisco world, a 3750 versus a 3850, and you need to know, hey, there was a bug against this 3750 in this code version, you can get off to a good start without having to connect to the device to get the information. So right now, this has only got temporary interface that was built with the IP address, and that's all from just this start inventory. The next thing we want to do, and this is one of the more interesting pieces for me of building a dynamic inventory, is we're going to go and do a playbook. Our number 2, now the inventory, instead of that starter one, is going to be a YAML file. And let's take a look at that real quick to show that within it, there's nothing about groups or your traditional Ansible inventory setup definition in there. And so all this is doing is defining what is NetBox URL and how do I want to group by the devices and how do I want to query that information. So I'm saying that I want to group these by a device role with the platform and has a primary IP. We'll take a look at what that looks like in a moment, but let's take a look at Ansible Inventory first. So now what Ansible's done at this point is gone out to the NetBox instance and dynamically generated these groups that are available for Ansible. So now we've got platforms iOS, platforms Nexus, EOS, and then it's also grouped these into roles as well. So the role switches, routers, and leafs. Let's go ahead and run this playbook to get the interfaces added into that. All right, and that warning is something that will get taken care of. It's just saying that as the key of primary IP is not available within the virtual machine section of the device search, and that will get addressed at some point here. So while that's adding, that playbook is going to take a little while. So it's going through the couple of the virtual machines have quite the number of interfaces on them. So we're going to kind of do some more navigating around NetBox itself and what are some of the benefits out of it. One of the big things that I did almost forget to mention here is this custom fields. So it'd be one thing if from the original NetBox it only had a device and management and this information, but what if you want to add some more information that's important to you or your environment? NetBox has the full capability for these custom fields to be built. So I've got this custom field that's been added where Ansible facts. So all this information is coming from the Ansible facts portion of a device. It had code version as one of the items. And so I went ahead and grabbed that and put that as a custom field. And to do custom fields, it's under the admin portal and admin. And here are your custom fields, and we've got all of the custom fields that are added. I've got two on this particular version. I've also got a demo one where I've got a description of the CPE install location. If you have remote sites, you may need to have the CPE is installed in the northeast corner where most of the time it's in the south corner, something of that nature. And by having this documented in NetBox, it gets away from tribal knowledge and is available for you as an engineer. So then we'll go back to view site. And then one thing that comes up a little bit as well, there is authentication authorization available with groups. If you add a group, you have a lot of permissions that you can set, whether you want someone can change a cable, delete a cable, whether or not they can view a cable or add cables. So that's all within the administration, and there is LDAP integration available as well. Let's see how we're doing. We're assigning IP addresses right now. So we'll take a look at the devices. And it looks like autocorrect doesn't want to let me search properly. So look at
question.
Yeah.
Do you have to manually create those custom fields, or those are created from Ansible, from your Ansible playbook as you define them there?
That's a great question. For this particular place, I did create the custom field. I forget whether or not that's available in the REST API to make them, but you definitely can make them when you have access to the ORM or the Django ORM, which is something that the custom scripts do allow. And I can get back to you on that.
Okay, thank you.
But the actual code and to just come back to this code version, the custom field that I created was this code version part. The Ansible is still able to write via the REST API to the custom field. So once you have the custom field, you should be in a good position to add information. So.
Okay.
So at this point now, we've got several interfaces that have been created available to us. And now we can go into the information about the IP address. It'll take us to an IP address object, which one of the things from an IPAM perspective, I know IP plan going ways back in memory, but another open source tool. But that tool would have an object for your prefix, and all the IP addresses for that prefix would be a part of that particular prefix. With NetBox, everything is its own object. So this IP address, the only way it has a tie to the prefix is based on the relationship that we know it's a /24 network, and we know what the parent prefixes are because of that. And so then it builds a relationship between the objects, not something that's tied directly to that object. So taking a look at the prefixes, and I've added a couple dummy prefixes for demonstration, but also just a couple more. When we take a look here, I've got a 172.16 address. And this is when you're driving via the GUI and doing your network design. This is one of the nice things that I really like about it, is that you can come in here, you're looking at the /12 prefix, but now you can get all the available prefixes and what their sizes are just from the screen. So again, NetBox will assume that if you don't have an object, it's not there. So you don't need to create a 172.16.0013 unless you actually want to use that particular space. And we can keep driving in, and all right, I have no IPs on that particular subnet. Let's go to this one. It's showing the utilization information, so you can start to see a lot of good detail there. And then when you come to the IP addresses, you can see what they're actually assigned to and go to that particular device. So everything, as you're trying to do some troubleshooting or something else of that nature, you can keep on navigating around. All right, so that's all done, and we're going to just so within the playbooks, I want to just show how I call these and how that differs from this being a collection, which I've installed via Ansible Galaxy, versus it being just a standard module. So as we have highlighted here, netbox.netbox, there's a couple extra, what it's called the namespace and the, I forget what the second thing is there right now, it's drawn a blank, but basically it allows you to have your namespace of NetBox, what is the particular application. So if this were Cisco, you could have cisco.asa.gatherfacts or cisco.ios.gatherfacts. And so collections, you can name things that way, or this way, which would have shortened my typing quite a bit for building this demo, because I built everything with this netbox.netbox. Whatever module it was I was using. You can also define within your play the collections there within your play as one of the keys, and say what collection you're looking to use. So netbox.netbox. So at that point, as Ansible's progressing through and executing the tasks, it'll be able to know that it's looking for netbox_device. So then at this point, we have NetBox should be in a good state for us to be prepared for the next thing. So with this, going to give a 5-minute break. This might be a great time to sign up for the NTC public Slack if you haven't already. There is another URL as well of ntcslack.com. And then there's an upcoming virtual event that Network Code and the organizers of NetBox and the maintainers. It's a virtual event on May 19th. And if you're looking, you may already have NetBox. If you're would be interested in presenting some of the interesting things you're doing with NetBox, you can click or go to the paper call link there and sign up to talk. So, we have any questions thus far? Otherwise, if we want to say come back in 5. Well,
Hey Josh, real quick question. What's the best editor would you recommend to do Ansible and Ansible playbook and integrated with NetBox?
So from an editor perspective, I'm at this point doing all my editing in Visual Studio Code. That could start a whole nother almost OS war type conversation. There's plenty of great ones out there, as long as you've got things in a YAML format. And then Ansible itself must run on a Nix machine. So whether it's a Mac or a Linux, you do need to have one of those OSs to be able to execute that Ansible.
Okay, thanks.
I have one more question.
Definitely.
Oh,
yep.
So can you, I know this is probably a long conversation, but can you touch a little bit on the reporting capabilities of NetBox? Can you export data to different formats? Is the API able to export data, or can you extract data via the API? What kind of reporting capabilities does it have?
Definitely. So there's two facets there. One, you've mentioned the API a little bit there. You're able to get pretty much every piece of information that is in the GUI through the API. Right now the GUI does not use the API specifically, but I know that there is work being done towards that. I have not come across anything that I cannot get from the API right now. There's also a reporting function that is an available piece that basically queries the database directly. And so with a little bit of Python to work on those reports, you can get some nice looking reports into NetBox.
Okay. Thank you.
We've got a couple of questions coming in the chat. I'll see if I can read through a couple of them. Do you have a GitHub with these playbooks? I'm assuming it's public GitHub.
I do. So all this will be on my public GitHub, which will be on the last slide, and I'll make sure to have all the links for you, Josh, to post in the meetup.
Excellent. Another question is there support for IPv6?
Yes, there is full support for IPv6 in this. So that's I've definitely. I need to add that a little bit to the next demo the next time on it, but yes, in all the same features.
Another one here. What are the resource requirements to kick the tires with NetBox? A small VM?
Yeah, definitely small VM. I've got up and run. I think it's still up and running on in my laptop. I have another Docker container running as well. Within that same organization on GitHub for NetBox-community, there's also an official Docker container available there as well. So I've typically my VMs, I'm giving it 2 CPUs and 2048 megs of RAM. And the 2 CPUs is just because I don't want to sit forever on apt-get updates. So, and I found my chat window, so I'd see the question about any integration with Nornir. Right now there is not any integration with Nornir. There is some integration with another open source project called Napalm that you can get some config information, and I can show that. These two things will be available of a configuration where it will actually do a show run on the device. It will not store that information, it'll just display that. And then there's also a LLDP neighbor, so you can see what the neighbors are, and it will not populate that information, it just shows the information. Awesome, thank you, Kevin. I was unaware of that Docker Compose environment there. So within the chat, there's the statement of there's a Docker Compose that can build a full environment within the netbox-docker project on the netbox-community page.
Yeah, and a quick note: the Blue Jeans chat does disappear once the meeting ends, but I will collect up some of this and I will put it up on the meetup page for this specific meetup. And just a heads up, if you go to our meetup page, you can actually look at previous meetups and see the discussions and stuff related to them. So I'll post a bunch of this content out there.
Terrific. With that, I think we can take a little bit of a 5-minute break to go ahead and refill your beverage or grab another snack or whatever if we want to start back again in, say, at 23 after. Or would you like to kind of keep going, Josh? Your call there.
Oh, we'll give it a couple minutes. So I don't know if I stop the recording and then start another one if it'll overwrite the first one. So I'm gonna just keep the recording going. But
sounds great.
Yeah, we'll give it a couple of minutes here. And again, feel free to dump questions into the chat. We'll try and pick them up as we go. Need some Jeopardy theme music here to just play as an overlay.
Yes, we do. Is there? Can I do that? No. And we can keep the conversation going because I have a full beverage here myself, but. Yeah, and as the questions go, from a backup perspective, there is if you search, I can bring up a search, I think, or on the Read the Docs page, there is a link for replicating your environment, which will give you the Postgres commands to actually dump the database, or not dump it from existence, but to get a copy of the database. So that way, if you want to replicate it to a lab environment from a production, or you start off with a lab and you want to go production, you want to copy the data over, that's been one of the more commonly asked questions, and so that information is available on the Read the Docs page. And yeah, exactly, Martin. With the you can use NetBox as an inventory source for Nornir, but given the topic of an Ansible meetup, we are going to stay specifically for Ansible at this point. Yeah. Perfect. Although that may bring some unpleasant thoughts for at times.
Flashbacks,
So.
man.
Yes.
I think we need to get that global mute going on.
The best is when you search for elevator music, or what did I search for? I think I searched for like elevator hold music. That's the first thing that showed up.
Yeah. And then to keep the noise going here before we get started shortly again, Kevin, on we do not have config context on this. So.
Josh, is there a good way of removing or seeing duplicate IPs or duplicate devices in NetBox, or can you pull or dump that data?
From a duplicate perspective, there is definitely probably the best way is to be going through the SQL database there. You could also grab all the IP addresses and run them through a for loop and see if there's any duplicates there with Python. So everything, NetBox itself won't necessarily tell you if there's a duplicate in that particular environment where it's, I'm assuming, some multi-tenancy there where you could have some duplicates. So in order to go through that, it will take a little bit of work, at least what I would look at doing.
Okay, thanks.
All right. I think that's been about 5 minutes, so we'll go ahead and get started with the second half, where we're going to look at extending Ansible with filters, and this is all going to get tied back into NetBox a little bit as well, where we're going to actually do an audit of a network device or all the network devices and their serial numbers that they exist within NetBox. So with that, though, we need to talk a little bit about filter plugins. So we'll just cover a little bit about what they are, where do I define these filters, and then how do I create a custom filter, and then when might you actually use filters. So the biggest thing about Ansible filters is they're used to manipulate data in some sort of fashion. They're all written in Python, and for when specifically in the Linux world, or as the scripts start to get executed on remote hosts, filters, according to the Ansible documentation, all occur on the control node. So I've thrown a couple filters in. So how do I know that I'm using a filter? So the filters are part of Jinja and Ansible's extension with Jinja. Here we've got a couple debugs where we've got the first one about putting a host name in all uppercase. So we see the host name on the left in your traditional Jinja enclosed double curly braces there. But then you got the pipe key or the pipe symbol, and it's going to upper. So what that's going to do is take the host name as a string and send it through the upper function. So that's one of the built-ins that come with Ansible. And there are a lot of Ansible built-ins, but custom filters, you may want to go ahead and do custom business logic, and that's why I like to look at them. So the second one is VLANs would be a list of VLANs. So whether there are 2, 3, 4 different VLANs defined in a list. So the length function will go ahead and tell you how many exist in that list. So if you're trying to do comparisons, is a list equal to another? One thing you may want to do is double check the length of it. So where do I put the filters? So the original setup is that you would put these in your root directory, just in a folder called filter_plugins. That's where Ansible looks natively. But what's becoming much more common practice is that you define a location in your Ansible config. And here you assign filter plugins to a folder. So commonly it's now you put a plugins folder. So that way you can put filters. Then there's also callback plugins and many other Ansible plugins available. It just helps to keep the project folder a lot cleaner. So now the filters, in the first half, we had 4 filters that were used. One was a MAC address conversion. When looking at MAC addresses and trying to put them into NetBox and keep things idempotent, it expects the MAC address to be in a certain format. And so that MAC address conversion is something that I did. I took the Cisco format that is 4 characters, dot 4 characters, dot 4 characters, and converted it into a 2-character all uppercase with colons every 2 characters. So that was something built in to add idempotency, make sure that the idempotency of the modules were actually happening. We built a role based on the host name. So if the switch was NXOS, it was a switch. And so basically just a real quick check of the host name, look for some special characters in it, and return the device role from that. And then I'm trying to build everything from fax. And so I took the IPv4 address that was gathered from Ansible fax, and for two of the platforms, they're in one format, and in the third platform, Ansible had it in a whole different format. And so instead of trying to put that logic through Ansible, I said, all right, I'm going to send that over to Python and handle the logic within there. And then the two that I do want to cover a little bit more of what we're going to look at here shortly is what I call the auditing filters, what I did to filter and do some more advanced audit capabilities. So first, I compared serial numbers. We're going to see during this process, I'm going to go ahead and grab the serial numbers that are defined in NetBox and the serial numbers that are defined on the device using Ansible fax. And then I'm going to compare the two. And so that's going to be the last filter. And the other one was Ansible could return two different variables depending on if it's a switch stack or a single switch. And so I want to go ahead and normalize the data into one style no matter what. So here's the audit of devices and what's going to happen with each of our tasks. First and foremost, we've just been talking about NetBox. That's going to be our source of truth for the devices. On the left, we've got Ansible. The first thing it's going to do is connect to the network devices and gather the facts. Then it's going to go ahead and reach out to NetBox on task number 2, and we're going to get a response back. We're querying for the host name based on the Netbox inventory. And then we're going to build a serial number list. We're going to build a NetBox serial list and Ansible or the device one. And then we're going to compare the two. I don't have the last two pieces, but what could we do with this data? We could notify Slack that there was some audit failures, or maybe create an incident in ServiceNow. So that's the kind of why we might be looking at doing something like this. So before, there will be a known failure. That's part of the whole demo experience, but I want to show a screenshot from NetBox. When I search for switch 1, we're going to get 2 devices back. So I added a second device to simulate that of a switch stack. So that way we can actually see what that looks like and see what the audit will do. So. And just to show that real quick in this live environment, if I can, somehow my mouse is getting stuck. We'll do a search for switch 1. And the thing about the second unit, seems to be pretty common practice here is that NetBox, you do want to track all your physical devices. So you're going to, from a logical perspective, when you're dealing with a switch stack, you're only going to have one device to connect to, and so you're only going to have one device with an IP address, but you're going to want to have multiple devices. If you have a switch stack set of 4, you're going to want to know all those serial numbers, so that way you can also track the device side of this. So coming back over, let's actually run that execution. We're once again going to use the dynamic inventory from NetBox. And this one does actually go relatively quick since it's just pulling the devices. We have this ignoring for iOS facts. When it's gathering facts, it's going to ignore the actual timeout. So now we're gathering all the facts about all the devices. And this capability to gather facts from network devices as part of the native Ansible ecosystem came into play for network devices in, I believe it's Ansible 2.9, maybe 2.8. Specifically, it's now been a little bit that it's been out, so it was not originally a part of Ansible for networking. All right, we're going. I forgot to take the gather facts function off, so it's going to go ahead gather just the real quick facts again. And I'll make sure to get that when I get that up to GitHub, we'll get that fixed up. And this is all running in a local Docker container that has much of the information in. So task 2, we've gathered information from NetBox. Now task 3 is gathered the serial number from the device. And as we go through the audit, we get one failure back. So one device showed failed. And then with this assert function, we went ahead and printed out both on success and failure. What are these serial numbers, both from the device perspective and from NetBox perspective. So in NetBox, we've got 2 serial numbers and for the device, and we've only got 1 serial number actually with the device. So that's as expected. So that's great. I also, within filters, as you're doing your own custom stuff, you want to make sure that these are all tested as well. So I do want to get into just how would we go about testing these filters. So you can do this in 2 different ways. And with this being here Ansible, I'm going to use Ansible to actually test this. So I've written a playbook where we're going, and I'll take a look at the particular playbook in just a moment, where we're going to go ahead and test all the filters. And then we'll go take a look at the actual filters themselves. And I've got a failure on this because I did go ahead and adjust the data on this one, Mac2 data. So within Mac2, I changed that here. So we'll just take a look at the playbook right away. So first thing, we're going to use known information about facts. So this is going to convert a serial number from this format where we have the 4 characters, dot 4 characters, dot 4 characters, and convert it into this format of 2:2:2, and so on. And so we're going to take this information, we're going to send that through the filter. We've got the pipe and the convert MAC addresses. Then we'll print the data, and then we're going to use the assert function, or the assert module, and we're going to compare that those 2 are the same. And now when we run this, it's still coming back with a failure. Let's take Mac2 out of there. Now we have everything coming out perfect. So that's exactly how you test the data. I should really set that data to being right. D800. So what did I miss? 0C98 53D9. Right, that should be, we'll give that a test, and we'll come back and there we go. Make sure that we got the right data. And so with testing, you are making sure that it is manual, that the data you want to get is the data that you're getting. So let's take a look at these filters. So we're here to take a look at what those look like. So I've gone ahead, I've got one file, filter.py, that's in my plugins filter folder. And so first we build a class. I think common practice is to name it filter module. And then the first thing you have to do is define a method that says this is filters, and how does Ansible know about these other filters? So how does Ansible know that there's a filter available of get Cisco iOS serial list? It gets defined in here under a return. Here's what the filter name is, and then this is the name of the method that you're going to actually use. So that's where this filter module dot Cisco serial list comes in, and it will call in here. The second piece about the filters is Ansible, or as Ansible is calling the filter, it's passing some information into the method. And so the first item in the method is going to be, on this particular get serial lists, we're expecting that the Ansible facts are coming in. And as we come in, Ansible net serial number, which is part of Ansible facts, will be a string. And Ansible net stacked serial numbers is a list. And so what I want to get back to my Ansible playbook is I want to have a list of serial numbers no matter what. So the first thing I'm doing is checking to see if this variable net stacked serial numbers exists. If it doesn't exist, it's a single device. I'm going to go ahead and not worry about it and not go in my if. But if it does exist, I'm just going to return it because I want it to be a list. It is already a list. We're in a good shape there. Then the second part is we're going to go ahead and get the serial number. And then we're going to return that serial number, but it's inside of a list here. So this now would become a single item list of just the one serial number. And then if a return none means there's an error because one of these two if statements should catch it. I talked about the MAC address and kind of showed that as well. I've got all the formats here of the MAC addresses. As I go through, we get the MAC address passed in, and we'll take a look at how Ansible calls these. So if the MAC address, first off, if it's none, this is a special case in a loopback address from a Cisco. I didn't want to start putting in some other check, and I probably should have, but saying that if it's coming across as none, I'm going to just return 000 for everything, or assign that to 000, but then send it through all the logic where we're first changing all the lowercase characters to uppercase, and then we're removing special characters is what these three lines are doing. And then this line is actually making it into this format here of the EUI 48 format. And then we send that back. And lastly, that I want to show about this within filters specifically, and this is something that took me 20-30 minutes when I was first learning filters how to do this. What if I want to send more than one piece of information into this Python module? So I've got this compare list where I'm going to compare the device serial numbers to that of the NetBox serial numbers. So we got two different arguments coming into this method. For this particular piece, I'm assigning these to a set. So if you aren't aware with Python, sets are a unique list effectively. So if there were 5 duplicates within a list, this will go ahead and remove the duplicates and come down to just one device. And then you can do some mathematical set theory based on sets. And so then I do the same for NetBox. And then I just return, are these equal? If they're equal, then it's going to come back true, and that's how our audit is coming back true. If these are not equal in size, it returns false. But let's take a look at that actual audit. So I'm going to press enter a few times and get rid of the printout messages. And so we get our device serial list, which matches up with the first item coming in of device serial list. And so then we still send it to the filter, and the filter name is compare lists. But now we have this extra part here with the inside of parentheses, and we're sending NetBox serial list. If you needed more than that, you could do arg3, arg4, and so on, that you can keep adding these inside of that parentheses there. And that's really a function of the Jinja filtering. So. And then real quick for just complete sake, I can also run those same tests, and we can take a look at this a little bit later using PyTest. So that the actual Ansible execution took about 2 seconds, still not too bad. But if we do PyTest, which is built for testing of the modules, it comes back with passing 7 tests in 0.36 seconds. And let's take a look at what a failure looks like with the PyTest, if I can pair serial numbers, and we'll just go ahead and change the serial number there in our test. And now we come back and we have a failure. And so when you're working in your organization on custom filters, how do we know that we have confidence in our filters? Well, anytime that there's a change and a push to a repository, you should be testing those modules. And so if the tests ever fail, then you know that your build is going to fail, and you should get that fixed before you allow that to get merged into the environment. So with that, I will go on. If you want to connect with us, again, we're on the web. You can take a look at our blog page and subscribe on your favorite RSS reader. Lots of good information coming out there. I've got a domain on there. If you want to come take a look, I've got a few Ansible execution pieces there. But join us on the Network to Code Slack. You can sign up there. It's a Heroku app, completely free. So with that, if you know Slack, the free Slack messages will eventually go away. But also connect with us on Twitter at Network to Code, or myself there, VanDeraa J. And then also our email for Network to Code is info@networktocode.com. And I'd be remiss if I forgot to say this, because I already kind of did, but one of the things that was announced late in 2019 is Network to Code does also offer support on NetBox. So yes, it's a free and open source tool. We're extending some support. Just send an email there. 2 of the 3 maintainers for NetBox are on staff with Network to Code. And so that's kind of our connection there. Beyond that, we really like to automate with it. So with that, any questions, comments out there, or dive into anything further? I see Jackson here. Sorry. Do asserts always use filter plugins? Do they have to start moving? No, they don't. Assert needs to come back with a true or false. So assert just is coming back. If true, all right, we're good, and keep moving. Assert can also be used to validate data inputs. So if you're within your playbooks, if you're expecting that a data is coming in some sort of format, you can use assert to verify that information is coming in. So if you want to make sure that you get an IP address on some sort of data entry and it's coming back as all text, you could write an assert function like that. And I don't know if there were any other ones out there.
Yeah, any last questions here?
And I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to hang out for a while, because I think one of the great things about our meetups is that we gather together and just have some general conversation. And I think we'll keep hanging out once Josh stops recording.
Yeah, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording here.